Once there lived a peacock fairy. Ever heard of her? Well, the peacock fairy was one of a kind. She had the body of a woman and the tail of a peacock. She was really pretty and all the peacocks of the world were in awe of her. And because she was a fairy, she knew a lot of magic tricks. And all the peacocks of the world wanted to become her student and learn all those magic tricks from her. They all went up to her and requested her to take them as her students. But she couldn't possibly take all the peacocks of the world to be her students, right? And so the peacock fairy came up with an idea. She called all the peacocks of the world to her one day. And she announced, "My friends, I know you all want to be my students, but you see, it's not possible for me to take you all as my students. I cannot teach you all my magic tricks. And so I have decided to hold a competition. You all look lovely. But you see, I want you to come back at midnight today and try not to look the same. The peacock that can stand out from the crowd and look most different will be my student." All the peacocks who were very excited and who were looking forward to it. The peacocks are normally very, very proud of their looks and their tail and the colors that they possess. And so all of them went away making plans to look the prettiest and to stand out in the crowd. Amongst those peacocks was a very kind-hearted peacock who did not think much of himself. He looked at himself and he said, "I am the most ordinary looking peacock in this whole world. I don't think I even stand a chance. I shouldn't worry about this competition. I should just go my own way." And so he did. The little peacock went his own way. As he was walking through the jungle, he saw an old woodcutter who was cutting trees, and he kept wiping the sweat off his head, but he kept on working on that tree. The peacock felt very sad, and the kind-hearted peacock went up to the woodcutter and he plucked his feathers and he said, "Here, take these feathers. You do look miserable and warm. These feathers will help you make a fan and fan yourselves so that you don't feel hot anymore." The woodcutter took those feathers from the little peacock and he fanned himself and he thanked the little peacock who walked away. He walked and he walked, and as he was coming out of the jungle, on the side of the road, a little girl was crying really loudly. The peacock went up to the little girl and he said, "What happened, little girl? Why do you cry?" "I am supposed to dance in my school, but I have no clothes to wear and I'm going to look the worst." So the kind-hearted peacock took some more of his feathers and gave it to the little girl. And he said, "Don't worry, little girl. Take my feathers and make a little crown for yourself. You can also put a few in your dress and you will be the most beautiful dancer in your whole school." So the girl looked at the feathers. He excitedly took the feathers and thanked the peacock, and she ran home to work on that dress of hers. The peacock went the whole day walking through the jungle and away from the jungle, and he made sure that by the time it was midnight, he would come back and assemble to see what the fairy peacock decides to do. But by the time he had managed to go back to where the fairy princess was, he managed to lose the rest of his feathers as well. And by now, the little peacock had no feathers. And he was in half the mind to not even go to the fairy peacock. He felt so embarrassed without his feathers. But he still went there. And he stood right at the back. The fairy princess was standing there, and all the peacocks from everywhere had come. They all looked beautiful, and they all had taken so much effort to look different, just like the fairy peacock had asked them to. One of the peacocks had decorated his tail with flowers to look beautiful and different. One of them had put fireflies on his tail so as to glow at night and stand out from the crowd. The fairy peacock was very proud of all of her friends, and she clapped for them and she said, "I see you've all done a fabulous job of standing out of the crowd. But I see one little peacock standing right at the back. I want you to come in front and tell me what happened to your feathers." The little peacock, who was already feeling so embarrassed, looked at the fairy peacock and said, "I gave away all my feathers to people who I thought needed it more than me." "What do you mean?" "You see, there was an old woodcutter who was really hot and he needed a fan, so I offered him my feathers. And a little girl who wanted to look the prettiest in her school, so I gave her some of my feathers. And then I met a few others who also needed those feathers more than me, so I just plucked them all out, and I didn't realize that I would have none left. But I still feel happy that I have been able to help them." The fairy peacock was very, very confused. She looked at the little peacock. She smiled. And she said to everybody, "I think I've found my student. This little peacock is going to be my student." The little peacock could not believe it. He thought he had no chance, and now amongst all the other peacocks, he was going to be the student of the fairy peacock. And then once again, when he thought of it, that he was standing in front of everyone, he felt really embarrassed. And the fairy peacock realized it, and at the swipe of her hand, one feather from each of those beautifully decorated peacocks came flying into the air and at once formed a fan of feathers, which landed right at the tail of our little peacock, who looked the prettiest of them all. So that was the story of our little peacock and how his kindness paid off.